So we ordered this in the other day. This is a model of the hips and the spine um, to show clients in 3D up close, give them a better idea of how the spinal and hip structure and hip joints work. And I'm immediately reminded, looking at it, just how little seems to be naturally understood about your own joint function. Um, Pain and weakness in the joints is a common and major complaint with regards to health and fitness. In fact, it's one of the main reasons why people end up at some point trying to get fit, because they have pain and articulation problems. Usually what happens though is things have gotten to the point where they require adjustment of the joints, especially the spine, like with chiropractics, or some sort of manipulation or active release of certain points, massage, stretching, and so forth and so on. And this is all to relieve pain and discomfort and lack of function. And again, like everything else we say, that's all fine and great, especially when it's forms of intervention that are relatively non-invasive as opposed to drugs or surgery. But really, even though the spine, as an example, is a very complicated area of the body because there's so many different joints as opposed to a simple joint like your elbow, there's so many different joints and all the nerves run through the column and out towards your various body parts. Even though it can seem sort of complicated in an overview, joint function is really quite simple at the end of the day. It requires, what you don't see here, muscle. Muscle makes things move. Muscle keeps things where they're supposed to be, especially when moving. And then it's all connected together with ligaments and tendons. But for some reason, this is heavily overlooked. A lot of people don't really notice or are aware that over time in their life, slowly weakening and lack of use of certain joints at certain angles causes them to function poorly. And that's where the damage comes. That's where poor posture results in grinding up of the joints and them not wanting to go back where they're supposed to over time, and weakness, let's say, in the hips and the legs causes the joint to grind up, and so forth and so on. So what we want to briefly show in this video is how we approach it, so that you can really understand the idea of strengthening muscles as it relates to joints, not just strengthening muscles as it relates to being strong and fit and losing weight and that sort of thing, but strengthening the muscles in order to have safe, pain-free body joints. Because you often hear you need to strengthen the muscles around the joints to keep them blah, 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 blah. Well, your whole body is basically joints. You know, when you're strengthening your muscles, you're not really strengthening them around joints. Now, certainly, you could say you strengthen the muscles around the knee to protect the knee, but all those muscles run right up to the hip, and the knee bone's connected to the hip bone, and the hip bone's connected to the yada, yada, yada. It's all connected together. So when you strengthen yourself, you're basically strengthening your ability to keep proper spinal alignment, especially when you're moving. And why? Very simple. If your joints give up, if your joints aren't functioning properly, then there's pain, discomfort, and lack of mobility and agility. That precludes you from moving in general. And the less you move, the more out of shape you get. It's a very simple way to look at it, but very sensible at the same time. So we're just going to show you a basic overview of some of the approaches that we take, and then a very simple but often overlooked way to exercise almost anywhere that will make a big difference for your spine. So stick with this and have a look. Again, when you look up close at the vertebrae, there's a lot of delicate parts and a lot of reason why you could create back pain, especially if there's weakness, especially if the muscles in place are not keeping the spine in proper alignment as you move around dynamically. Back musculature is quite complex. You can use passive moves like stretches and such to relieve pain. But we've found that direct strengthening of the muscles required for spinal alignment makes the biggest difference. Here's a low back machine, sort of our foundational machine for this. This targets the lumbar spine, that's the lower back, in a very safe way. The hips are restrained and the thighs are restrained, allowing you to, while the feet are hanging, engage the glutes and the hamstrings as well as the low back. Then when we bring the foot pad up in place, you're still getting that same careful, precise articulation of the lower back so that you can progressively overload with extra weight and reps without hurting yourself. But with the feet added in place, you get a little more hip involvement, a little less ham involvement. Would depend on the actual specific issues of the individual in question. Here the rotary torso uses one leg to counter steer, and the midsection, the obliques, the lower back, and the abs to create rotation. This is a great way to target the core muscles without compressing the spine at all. The machine allows you to do both directions, and unlike free weight movements where you mimic this action with something between your knees or something in your hands twisting side to side, this is very precise. Like any machine, you can precisely and progressively overload, which is extremely important in areas of the cervical spine, the neck. You'll notice the neck's not protected by the rest of the torso, so it's a very delicate area of the spine. And that's where a machine that not only allows you to work through the full range of motion of the neck muscles in question, but carefully in a stable environment. Here we've even gone to great lengths to find a sort of a unique ab machine which flexes the spine 30 degrees in proper function to how a spine works, and also sort of mimics a semi-standing posture. There's no restriction around the hips, which allows you to naturally relax your lumbar spine as you're contracting your abdominals. And this can go a long way to relieving back pain while building up core strength and not cheating the movement with hip flexors. Your entire body is quite complex, but nothing is as complex as the spine, and it's difficult to work it safely. A simple way to get moving that's often overlooked because of its simplicity is the basic side bend, where you bend to one side here to the right, and you're using the muscles on the left side to pull you back upright. Then bending to the opposite side, you're using the opposite muscles to come upright. When you mix this movement carefully, without too much weight, especially in the beginning, and you move slow, when you mix it carefully with a forward bend, that Tierney's about to do here, and a soft knee, your knees aren't locked, you can get a lot of good muscular stimulation to the core, and adding in crunches, of course, would round out that program. So once again, the spine's very complex, and it requires strength like any aspect or joint in the body to stay fit.